AM 1480 WLEA.
Former ABC reporter and US-UN Reports, Tom Osborne is with us today.
Next on News Talk, AM 1480 WLEA, the Newsmaker Show with Kevin Doran.
Brian O'Neill in for Kevin Doran. Tom Osborne, thanks for calling in.
My pleasure, Brian. Always a pleasure to come to WLEA.
Yes, and we hear you weekday mornings right after the 8:30 news with your US-UN report. The CIA torture report, that was a big talk in Washington on Tuesday. John McCain even came out against it.
Yes, of course. Well, John McCain has been on the forefront, having been the victim of terrible torture in Vietnam, and he's always been against the policy of torturing to get information. And he's one of the sensible voices on this issue. The problem is that this is actually, it's not old, it's not new news. We've been hearing it over the months. It's been dripping out. We know that the CIA has, in fact, had a program in which people were renditioned, taken to other countries, and were tortured. And now what we have is a Senate investigation, which has actually corroborated these facts. The reason that people are very upset is because it's now, a fact, a formal report, which is presented to the United States, the American people, and we have to deal with it. We have to comment on it. It is a very, very dark period in our American history, post 9/11. People didn't know where this was going. They didn't know who to turn to or who to attack. So they're basically rounding up anyone that was on their lists. And a lot of these people have been in those prisons, Guantanamo and so on, for 12 years, some of them not even charged yet. So all of this is going to come out in this formal report. A lot of people are very concerned that it's going to cause violence. But I'm sure it will, because they're looking for any excuse to carry out these terrorist attacks. So, but I suspect on the other side, if you look at it, the American people have always been straightforward. They've always been honest with themselves, and if we have to look at this as a terrible reality, we need to face it and get it out and move on and make sure it doesn't happen again.
John McCain said that this is something he understands personally. As you pointed out, he was a prisoner at what they call the Hanoi Hilton.
Yes, John McCain was. He was a prisoner, and he was also tortured for a long time. And I don't know how many years it was, but the fact is he came out of it, and he is the one person who should know whether this makes a difference or not. And he says it doesn't. I'd rather take his word.
Does this go back to about a decade ago with Abu Ghraib, or does it go back farther, do you think, Tom Osborne?
Well, it probably goes back farther, but Ghraib is certainly the prime example. We don't really know, because this is the first time we've had such an investigation and such a situation. So it's new for the United States, and it should be shocking to us. But I think the quicker we get it out and stop trying to pretend like it's not there, the better off we're going to be. And we are going to suffer abroad. Some people are going to suffer because of it. And that's what people like John McCain has always said. You don't get information from these situations. But what you do get is you get a convert against the United States. And that's what we're ending up with right now. Perhaps, I'm not an expert on terrorism. I'm sure there are situations in which, who knows what the stakes were, and if things had to be done to get information fast. But we should never, never, never support this kind of torture, because it only ends up coming to our doorstep, which it already has.
Do you think that it's a little surprising that an organization like the Central Intelligence Agency would kind of throw the Bushes under the bus, considering the Bush ties to the CIA?
Well, the thing about the CIA is they're an agency that serves the president, and so they have to present the president with the information they have, and they present the president with the possible solutions to the urgency of the situation. So it's the president who has to make the decision. I'm sure that President Obama's had the same experience with the drones. When he's taking out some of these people, he's taking 13 or 14 civilians with him. This is the horror of this kind of war. But it is the president. It's at his foot. It's at his table. It's his decision. The CIA is responsible for coming up with the wrong solutions, perhaps, but the execution and the responsibility is his.
The New York Times online on Tuesday quoted CIA officials as saying that this Senate report that was put together by the Democrats, basically, is only part of the story.
Well, I think that's very true. And that's the unfortunate part about it, is it's a secret society, and it cannot reveal a lot of things. We don't always know what they prevented in these situations. That's why it's so difficult, I think. So, there's probably things that they could tell us that would exonerate some of their actions, but they can't tell us. But that's the job they've got, and it's an impossible one, I'm sure.
The Central Intelligence Agency is claiming that the Bush administration did not know everything. They were kept in the dark during the Bush years. I suppose what you have is one person working during the Obama years going back and looking through the records and saying, okay, the CIA did not inform the Bushes of everything that was going on in that era.
But once again, it comes back to the president's desk where the buck stops, as Harry Truman said. And whether or not it was carried out without his knowledge, he should have known. And that's his responsibility to know. And of course, no corrections were made. So obviously these were actions that were ultimately approved. So nobody was kept in the dark. I just don't see how that adds up.
Senator Marco Rubio of Florida, he came out with a statement that said, and this was on Twitter, he said, "Those of us who served in the aftermath of September 11, 2001 deserve our thanks. Not a one-sided partisan Senate report that now places American lives in danger." Your thoughts on that statement from Rubio?
Well, it's not a one-sided report. It's a report that was produced by the United States Congress, and it had bipartisan input, and we haven't seen it yet, so it's difficult to make judgments about it, but it's certainly not a one-sided report. It's a report which is, as I understand it, from bipartisan accounts. It is detailed, footnoted, about 500 pages long, and it goes into very, very, very specific detail with facts that you can prove and you can observe. So we'll see.
ABC News Radio is just reporting online that an ex-CIA agent said that the prison sentence that he's serving, and it's a 3-year sentence, John Kiriakou, I think is how you say his name, he says it was a punishment for whistleblowing on torture techniques that the agency was using.
I'm not surprised that whistleblowing is not really very well respected in the CIA. They just somehow don't go together. That's my first impression.
ABC also reports that the CIA is claiming in their defense that they saved thousands of lives through the torture techniques.
They say that their program is successful. They have maintained that all along, at least the majority of the CIA officials. But you know what? There's no way of proving that, really. I don't know how you would prove it. That thousands of lives were saved, perhaps, we'll never know. But on the other hand, we also set a precedent in which, we're going to be trapped in our own procedures. If you do it on the battlefield yourself, they're going to do it to you. And I think that's the sad thing about all of this.
I'm guessing the UN is going to have something serious to say about this news. Tom, NBC is reporting that CIA contractors who helped develop and operate the torture techniques used on suspects, including waterboarding, they were paid over $80 million to train.
Brian, it definitely is out of my league. I just can't imagine, where that $80 million went for this training and what it was for. But again, we're not very surprised at the spending going awry, are we? So, yes, I would question that figure seriously. I'm sure most people would.
Now, in the same week that former ABC correspondent Ann Compton came out against President Obama, you can hardly interview a former ABC correspondent without asking Tom Osborne, who used to work for ABC and knows Ann Compton, what he thinks of Ann Compton slamming President Obama. Ann Compton, who tends to lean left, had high words of praise for President Ronald Reagan, but was pretty critical of President Barack Obama.
I have seen in the last year Barack Obama really angry twice. Both were off the record times. One profanity-laced, where he thought the press was making too much of scandals that he didn't think were scandals. Another where he took us to task for not understanding the limits he has with foreign policy and the way he's dealing with the Middle East and Iraq and Afghanistan. And I don't find him apologetic, but I find him willing to stand up to the press and look him in the eye, even though it was off the record, and just give us hell.
Tom Osborne, are you as surprised as I am that Ann Compton said that?
I am surprised with the candid statement of Ann Compton. She's very balanced and very informed and very respected. I don't really necessarily think it detracts anything from her. She's basically telling something I think that all of us suspect, that the president is oftentimes furious because the progress he makes, he's 2 steps forward and 3 steps back. There's nothing he can do right. He's had the whole Congress against him for 6 years, and the press isn't bailing him out on that either. So I am surprised, actually more surprised, to hear the president's burst of profanity. I find that more out of character than I do Ann Compton's comment.
Tom, you know a lot of reporters in the loop, both in Washington and New York. It did come out that the reporters' phones were tapped and things like that. You couldn't necessarily trace that to Obama, but this is kind of a revelation.
Well, I think it is. Like I said, I'm surprised. I'm more surprised at the president's reported reaction than I am at Ann Compton's criticism. She sounds offended, but I know she's tough and she knows her business, so I doubt that she's in any way cowed by it. But I've often marveled at how the president controlled himself. I mean, if you look at every single thing he's done, major policy-wise or otherwise, maybe you need to fine-tuning or here. He took it on, he carried it out, and he got no good press out of the improving economy, no good press out of saving us from financial disaster, no good press about getting medical attention to people who never had it. I mean, he just didn't get a break. So I guess I can imagine him just losing it. I do find it hard to picture, I'm sure you do too, with the character that we see on television.
We're talking with Tom Osborne from US-UN Report, and when we get back, we'll talk with Tom about the UN's attempts to get funding for Syria. Tom Osborne is our guest today. You cover the United Nations, and you did for years with ABC2, and now you do with US-UN Report. The United Nations has made a huge appeal for money because of the Syrian situation. What can you tell us about that?
Well, this is something that's been developing for some time, as you may know. I mean, the UN is always in a crisis. We're talking about an appeal now for $16 billion. This is to fund its humanitarian operations just next year, and this is with half of that total going to victims of Syria conflict. Of course, you've got all the spillover from in the neighboring countries, so. They're saying that the money will be provided for about 57 million of the most vulnerable people around the world. And the UN humanitarian chief said this is an unprecedented amount. A lot of this is due to the fact that, for example, the UN is requesting about $3 billion just to help the people that are displaced inside Syria. And then there's another $4.4 billion that it needed to take care of over 3 million people, 3 million Syrian refugees that have gone into neighboring countries. So this is really Valerie Amos, who's the humanitarian affairs director for the United Nations, says that this is an unprecedented appeal that's going out. The problem is that, the money that's needed most of all is to cover the humanitarian crisis caused by the war. But what we need is a political solution, and there just doesn't seem to be any. The lion's share of the money, about 80% of it, will go towards helping just the vulnerable people in those areas of conflict. We're talking about the spillover actually is involving about 4 countries, Syria, Iraq, and South Sudan, and the Central African Republic. Those are the most important focus of the appeal that's going out right now. And as a matter of fact, Syrian war, the UN envoys are saying that they are now having to stop delivery of food to Syrians until they can get this appeal going. A lot of countries have committed themselves, but no one has come through. So this is the kind of situation that we often get in the UN when you have coalitions. They promise a lot, but they don't come through, and this is really critical right now because the winter is coming in, and these people are going to be just absolutely desperate.
What coalition would you point a finger of blame at, Tom Osborne?
Well, it's mainly the surrounding countries that are in the region. I mean, these countries that are most affected, Lebanon, Turkey, Jordan, Iraq, Egypt, all of them are part of the coalition. They all have promised money, and of course the permanent 5 members, U.S. And the UN and Russia and China and so on, all of them. But so far, the money is very slow, and it's not coming in fast enough to save these people's lives.
We've been talking with UN Report's Tom Osborne, the former ABC correspondent. Tom, any final thoughts before we go?
None other than I would hope that the new year will bring some peace, and I wish that to all of your listeners, and I thank you for letting me share my thoughts today.
Tom Osborne, UN Report, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Brian. Always a pleasure.
It's AM 1480 WLEA Hornell. NBC News is next.